Okay, welcome back to another video. We're going to be analyzing the TikToker Damian Kater, and I've already done an analysis on him, but the audio file got corrupted, which is bad because it was a 30-minute video. So for this one, I'm going to try to condense it to about 10 to 15 minutes. So let's begin with Damian's side profile. Generally, he doesn't really have any flaws in the side. So his brow region is perfectly ideal with a nasofrontal angle, or this angle here, of about 126 degrees. And his facial flatness, or the convexity is what it's called, is slightly lower than ideal at about 166 degrees. And what this just means is that his profile is a bit rounded, but not too far from the ideal range. So it looks perfectly normal, and actually this might look slightly feminized. However, again, it's not that far from ideal, so it just adds a pretty appearance to his side profile, where he doesn't have a incredibly protruding brow ridge. But generally all his measurements are ideal or very close to ideal. His lip assessments in the side profile are excellent, so you can see that there is an alignment here between the upper and lower lip, and if you take a line from here, there is more distance from the upper lip to the lower lip. And obviously these are just estimates because these are not ideal photos, so if you ordered an analysis from me on my website, I would not be able to work with photos like this for the most part. At least if you ordered the $200 package, I would likely make you retake photos because that's a decent amount of money to spend for it to be inaccurate. But either way, so we're just doing our best, and otherwise I wouldn't really be analyzing him at all. In terms of his other cephalometric assessments or measurements of the face, he has excellent harmony between the chin and the nose. This is called the nasofacial angle, and his nasomental angle is just a variation of that, which is also ideal. Now, that quality of that photo is a bit low because it was hard to find a side profile photo. However, in this photo you can still see that his gonale angle, or this angle made between the jaw, is ideal. It's about 125 degrees here. However, when the face is fully turned to a full-on side profile, the angle is bound to be lower, and it is about 113 degrees here, which is perfectly ideal and masculinized. So generally he has perfect harmony of the jaw. One thing we could note is that his ramus, or this back portion, is slightly short at about 0.51 times this distance. It is not a big deal though, it just means that he has a slightly shorter than ideal ramus, actually only by about 0.08. So it's not too deviatory from the ideal range, but nevertheless it is a minor flaw, and you can even see that here. Actually, a good thing that he does is, typically when your ramus is on the shorter side, you can cut the sideburns a bit higher, which seemingly makes it look longer. And conversely, if your ramus is long, say like Henry Cavill, you can afford to have sideburns that go over here. And you can just play around with that, and it generally affects how masculine the jaw appears. And you can just see that his sideburns are a bit on the higher side. It harmonizes well with his given facial structure. Okay, so that covers all the side profile. There's not really much else to go into, or else we'll spend a while here. But either way, he scores about 84.9% in the side profile, which is exceptionally high and top tier. It means he doesn't have that many flaws at all. So let's go into the front profile now. In terms of the front, I did work with a variety of photos, so I referenced any of these 3 photos for various measurements because some of them will be more accurate with a certain head position. For instance, in this photo, the head is slightly tilted down, so the facial thirds will be distorted. but either way he has pretty even facial thirds, so his facial thirds are perfectly ideal, and we can actually just do that roughly here. And without getting this specific measurement, he does have idealized facial thirds. So we have the lower third that starts at the chin and ends at the subnasal, and then the middle third ends at the glabella here, and then the upper third, which also ends at the glabella and the upper hairline. And his lower third is about 36.3%, which just means that he has a taller lower third, and then his other thirds are proportionate. So without the specific measurement, in summary, he has balanced facial proportions. So each of his thirds are about the same length, and if his head is tilted down, that becomes even more equal. So here, with his head slightly tilted back, his lower third is gonna be a little bit larger, but either way, in terms of scoring, he scores perfect in that respect. One minor flaw that he has is his mouth is a bit wider than ideal, at about 1.58 times the width of the nose. So this is more feminized to have a higher ratio within the ideal range, and the ideal male range is about 1.38 to 1.54, so he falls slightly outside of that, but generally this isn't a giant flaw, it just leads to a more feminized appearance, and his nose is on the narrower side. Okay, his jaw width goes without saying that it's ideal. It's not overly wide or narrow, at about 85% of his cheekbone width. So you could argue that's slightly on the narrower side, but either way, it's not overly narrow to distinguish as a flaw. His face shape is slightly on the longer side, although not to an extreme extent. So his facial length is 1.41 times longer than his facial width. And this just means that his face is within a normal range where it does not appear too long or too narrow. However, you want to be slightly below 1.41. Generally, as a male, between 1.33 and 1.38 tends to look the best. He has high set cheekbones that also kind of goes without saying. You can just see the widest part of his face here is right near the eyes. And similarly, you can see that in any photo really. It's pretty close to the eyes at about 83% of his mid-face height. And how we just assess this quickly is we take the widest part of the face here, and then we divide this length by the length of the entire mid-face up to the eyes, and it's about 83%. So that is high. Anything above 81% are high cheekbones. In terms of his eye spacing and mid-face proportions, he has excellent facial harmony. In fact, perfect, which is typical among highly attractive faces. So if we take a look at the distance between his eyes, we can see that the distance between his pupils, or the pupils are the black inner portion of the eyes, in between the iris. So it's about 46.1% of his facial width, which is perfectly ideal, and just means that his eyes are not overly close together or far apart. And similarly, we can see that his eyes are about 0.9 eyes apart. Ideally, it would be closer to 1, but between 0.9 and 1 still scores the maximum amount of points. And overall, he has excellent eye area harmony. And we can say the same about his mid-face region here. So his mid-face ratio is a perfect 1-to-1 proportion. And I don't know which photo I measured this on, but I believe I took an average. So it may be slightly less in this photo or slightly more in whatever photo. But either way, it's perfectly ideal, even if it's not an exact 1-to-1. So it just means that his mid-face is not too elongated via this assessment. However, if we take a look at a more important mid-face assessment called the facial width to height ratio, which is typically more important for indicators of aggressiveness or creativity or general perceptions of general social perceptions, because the midface has a lot to do with the proportions and the features that are comprised in it. So in this entire midface is the nose, the eyes, the eyebrows, which can all affect how you are perceived, especially the eyes. So it's no surprise that the eyes and the midface have a high correlation to perceptions of aggressiveness or dominance. But his midface ratio is about 1.87, which is ever so slightly outside of the ideal range of 1.9 to 2.05. But either way, I would not classify his midface as elongated. Okay. And I apologize if I'm stuttering a bit because it's been a long day and I've taken an exam, so my mental bandwidth is kind of fried. But either way, we can move on to his eye area now, which is equally as good in terms of tilt. So the tilt of his eyes, or we just take the inner eye corner and the rays relative to the outer eye corner, is perfectly ideal at about 5.8 degrees. And this simply means that his eyes are ideally upturned. They're not overly upturned or droopy at all. And this is also a typical trait among attractive faces. His eyebrow tilt is about 7 degrees, so he doesn't have overly upturned eyebrows, but they're still ideal. Anything around this level or more upturned is ideal in a male face, and among women, they can have slightly more upturned eyebrows. One of his slight flaws is that he has more medium set eyebrows. In this photo, they look lower set because his head is tilting down to look more intimidating. However, generally, he seems to have more medium set eyebrows at about one eye height above his eye line. So that's not perfectly ideal in a male face, but it's not a big flaw either way. Okay, so that covers everything of importance. So what is his total score? And actually, he scores exceptionally high in the front at 85.8%. And we already mentioned that his side was 84.9. So there isn't a large discrepancy between his front and side profile. Both generally don't have any real glaring flaws. Most of his flaws are just slightly outside of the ideal range, for a total score of 85.4%. And this harmony score encompasses 46 cephalometric variables, which are just measurements of the human facial proportions. So all this means is that he scores high in facial harmony.